Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. Conscious communication, bridging authenticity and awareness. I think this is really a passionate and important topic for me because so often we talk about authenticity and we talk about the importance of self-awareness, but how are they interrelated and how does this ultimately affect the way we show up and the way other people experience us? So that's what I want to delve into a little bit more today. So a brief introduction of myself, which is kind of strange. Jana Etienne, that is my name. I'm a certified diversity executive, and I develop trainings and workshops, as well as facilitate conversations and programs focused on helping organizations create spaces where people can navigate confidently, lead inclusively, and communicate bravely. My work is centered on something I call fearless inclusion, and we're going to be touching on a lot of that today. I define fearless inclusion as the freedom to be yourself and the ability to create space for others to do the same. Notice that inclusion then starts with the statement about me and myself. That's a sidebar. I'm giving you the preview. What is the work that I do? I do this by helping participants cultivate the skills to build understanding and interpersonal connections across differences of identity, of experience, of background. I believe that when we can bridge that gap between awareness of diversity and our intention to be inclusive, that's how we can create those spaces of true belonging where all of us can just show up as we are and do the things as we do. I had 26 plus years as a CPA in practice, specializing in tax, but please don't hold that against me today. But I do bring that lived experience to my work every day. I will be taking questions as we go along, so I would love for all of you to put in questions throughout the program, and I will address them as we go along. And if I miss them, Vaughn, you will tell me that there's a question in the queue. Fair?
Yes, ma'am, I got it.
All right, first polling question then. As we talk about authenticity, what I'd like to know is what you think authenticity is. So let's go ahead and open that polling question. When we say authenticity, what does that mean to you? All right, let me find that polling question here.
All right. Yep, we do have that first poll up and running for everyone. So go ahead and get your votes in. Sometimes it does have like a slight delay of showing the results on our side, Jana. So okay. It just popped up for me. So just so
okay, perfect. Now I wanted to ask this question because we talk about authenticity, but we don't necessarily talk about what that means. And in fact, when we think about a lot of the vernacular we use in work around culture and around, especially in the diversity and inclusion space, we have this assumption that when we throw out a term, that we all know what it means and we're referring to it in the same way with the same context. But that isn't necessarily true, as I've come to learn. And that's why understanding how we are defining something for purposes of this conversation is important. All right, you tell me how long the poll needs to be open and then close, and then I can speak to what I see as the
All right. Yeah, we usually keep our polls open for about a minute, and I think it's been a minute already, so I'm going to go ahead and get ready to close the poll down. And I believe you can see the results. It looks like majority, 45% saying being transparent.
So. And then I see 67% said being candid. 34% being vulnerable.
Oh, that's the numbers. The percentages are on there.
Oh, man, 44%, 45%. You know what? I'm an accountant. But don't hold it against me. Didn't I say that? Well, so the reason I wanted to share this is because, as I mentioned, having a common language around this is important. What is the correct answer here? Yes. And I say that a little bit sarcastically, tongue in cheek. How about we look at the definition? Because it actually is all of those things or some element of those things. So this is the definition from Merriam-Webster. And it said, the one that I like the most that really stands out to me is the third one, which is being true to our own personality. It's being true to ourselves. And I think that understanding and looking at authenticity from that perspective is important, because if we're talking about authenticity and self-awareness, being true to ourselves requires us to have a level of self-awareness and different types of self-awareness, which we're going to touch on. But before we jump into the self-awareness piece, let's explore authenticity a little bit more. So beyond this definition, Let me see, moving my slides. Bring your whole self to work. We've heard that phrase a lot. I'm not exactly sure what it means. And the reason I put this up here is that when we to bring your whole self to work, what does that mean? Do you want me to bring actually all of myself to work? Do you want me to bring my professional self to work? The challenge with the bring yourself to work and the authenticity thing is that what we're trying to do, if you just Google authenticity generically, you're going to find something about aligning your internal self with your outward behavior. This is really about not covering up or hiding those differences that make you unique, being true to yourself and all of those things. But in reality, it can be very difficult to do that at work, because at work, there is sometimes a pressure to fit in. At work, there might be some different dynamics that are creating a culture and experience that makes it uncomfortable for me to show you my real or true self. So here I have actually put together a list of a lot of the different things that keep us from revealing more of ourselves. And to be fair, this isn't about TMI, because we want to be careful that when we say authenticity, what we're not saying is you can say what you want and do what you want, how you want, because that's being authentic. Authenticity doesn't give you the right to be mean. Authenticity doesn't mean you can be rude or dismissive. You still need to be thoughtful. You still need to be considerate. You still need to be respectful. But what you don't need to do, in theory, what we don't want you to do is to pretend or to hide. And so that's the idea around authenticity. But what holds us back? Well, mismatched communication styles might mean that I talk with my hands a lot. Some people never do. They sit very still. And that can suggest that there are different things that we mean. Arms, I don't even know from the camera if you can even see this, but arms crossed can suggest I'm guarded. I don't want to talk. Or it might be that I have a more passive style of communication versus a direct style of communication. There could be personality conflicts, and we know these occur. There are people we naturally gravitate toward and get along with, and people we don't. And we still have to work together. But if there's a personality conflict, I might change my behavior, which to the point of avoidance of somebody. And then that behavior shows up to the other person as perhaps inauthentic. Microaggressions are those things we say or do that unintentionally offend. And often those terms or those microaggressions happen toward people who are minorities of a number of different categories. So they might be targeting women. They might target somebody who's a person of color or a person who's, say, an immigrant and immigrated to this country. There are different types of microaggressions, but if we find that we're experiencing these over the course of the day or in different situations, it's going to cause me to want to shut down or hide. And I mentioned before, there could be different unwritten rules. And then the bottom one, not here to make friends. The idea that I need to come to work and be more than just my professional self suggests that I need to be more revealing, and that this is more about making friends when in fact I just came here to work. And if that is your mindset, that is you being authentic at work. So that's why we want to really imagine and rethink when we say authenticity, what do we mean? This is meaning true to yourself, and coming forward with your own values and presenting yourself the way you want to be naturally, not hiding, not covering, not pretending, not assimilating, which means I'm actually changing my behavior. Actually, this is called code switching, changing your behavior, your dress, your mannerisms, the things that you talk about in order to fit in. That is not being authentic. And so what we're talking about is doing those things that you feel comfortable with so that you can show up the way that makes sense for you without making those kinds of apologies. Now, in terms of self-awareness, the reason self-awareness is important here is that being true to myself requires me to know myself. That sounds a little silly, but not only does it require me to know myself, but in the work context, as well as how other people are experiencing me. So let's look at the definitions then of self-awareness. So there are two types. These are my self-awareness kitties. I have one who believes that they are a lion, and I have one who thinks when they look in the mirror that other people see them as a lion. And so that is internal self-awareness, which is how we see ourselves. It's our own values and perceptions. It means knowing my strengths, knowing my weaknesses, and having a sense of how those influence my behaviors and my actions. External self-awareness, on the other hand, is understanding how other people see me. Now, this includes how people might assess my capabilities, how people might observe my actions and behaviors. But it's also about having an understanding of how people are experiencing me. So what's interesting about these two types is they are completely independent of each other. So you can have a high internal self-awareness and a low external self-awareness. And I'm going to show you a grid that shows you the impact of those two, or what those two combinations might lead to. But what's important about having self-awareness is that when we can see ourselves internally, it gives us a better sense of confidence. It helps us make changes and adapt as we need to, and grow and develop. External self-awareness helps us pivot and evolve our behaviors. And if we're leaders in organizations or managers, it can help us create a space and a team by being responsive to that team, not just observing the needs of the team and the environment, but the impact you are having on that and how other people are responding to you. That can change performance, that can change engagement, that can improve retention. All of these things can happen simply by working on our own self-awareness. This also then helps us create that confidence, or build that confidence to be ourselves, be more authentic or true to ourselves day to day without covering or hiding. Now, the reason I have this here as the foundation of self-awareness is because when you start with that as a base, it really does enable us to have more self-control, to give us a sense of agency, to boost our self-esteem. It means that we can take responsibility first for our actions instead of being this might sound negative. I don't want this to sound negative, but the victim mindset, woe is me, or things that are happening to me and I'm not aware of how this is, what is happening that makes me feel this way. When we develop self-awareness, we take that responsibility, we explore, we reflect, and we start to navigate and think through all of, what am I thinking now? All of the little dominoes that can fall, and how one thing affects one thing affects one thing, but how they affect me, as well as how I am affecting others. Really, the self-awareness can also boost the sense of pride that we have in our work. All of these things, when you feel comfortable, when you feel confident, when you feel connected at work, when you have an understanding of the things you say and the things you do and the impact it has on others, we perform better. We feel more connected at work. We have stronger trust with our colleagues. Our colleagues trust us as well. And all of those things are necessary to create the space where we see that boost in collaboration and we see those boosts in performance and creativity in organizations. We talk a lot about diversity and inclusion from the perspective of, well, I'll say it frankly, when we talk about diversity, often we're thinking race, gender, age, gender identity, and so forth. But in fact, we're talking about the full dimension of the diversity that lies within all of us, not just those dimensions that we classically think about, but there are a lot of other things: socioeconomic difference, background, where was I born in the country? What is my first language? Neurodiversity is something we're talking more about. And when we can bring all of that in here with comfort and confidence that I'm not going to be judged, that self-awareness and understanding helps us be braver at work. Now, I talked earlier about the two types of self-awareness. We have high self-awareness, internal self-awareness and external self-awareness. And I really like this chart. Did I put so I put down here, and it might be too small for you to read, but I put down here the reference. This came from an article, some research that was done back in 2018. This article is from Harvard Business Review. And what she did was she looked at the intersection, if you will, of these different types of self-awareness and came up with these 4 archetypes, which I found to be fascinating. So the one in the top left corner is an introspector. So they have a low external self-awareness. So they don't necessarily have a clear sense of how they're perceived by others, but they have high internal self-awareness. They are very clear about who they are, what they stand for. But the result here is that they may have what are so-called blind spots. They may not be aware of how their behaviors are impacting others. And so they're moving along and they're doing things. I sometimes used to call myself a bull in a china shop because perhaps that might have been me back in the day. And then we have pleasers, which are opposite corner, high internal, low external. And the challenge here is that they're not really seeking to know themselves. They're really going to be more focused on how they're perceived. And the risk here is that they might be compromising in order to get along, go along to get along, if you will. That compromising might mean you aren't being your authentic self at work. Aware in the upper right-hand corner, this is the ideal state because you have a clear sense of who you are, constantly seeking input from observation and feedback to know how other people are experiencing you. Of course, on the bottom left corner, then the opposite is you're basically unaware in both ways. You don't have a clear sense of yourself. So you're going to be more focused on what you're doing and saying than why you might be doing and saying something. Now, in that same article, I've loved this quote, and I love focusing on this and bringing this up anytime I talk about self-awareness, because most of us think we're self-aware, but most of us are not self-aware. And in the bottom, I'm drawing your attention, your eye to this specifics part. 95% of us think we're self-aware. And I used to ask this polling question in the past where I asked people, do you consider yourself self-aware? And most people would say, yeah, I think I'm pretty self-aware. And then I would ask people, do you work with somebody who is not very self-aware? And most people say, yeah, I work with somebody that's not very self-aware. Now, I want you to imagine we're in a room of 100 people. And 95% of the people in that room say, yeah, I'm self-aware. Then 95% of the people in that room say, yeah, I work with somebody who's not self-aware. You see, the math on that doesn't work. And it tells us and it validates for us that there is this gap. And when you have this lack of awareness between coworkers, it can actually create interpersonal conflict. It can result in frustration with other people in the organization because perhaps we are pointing things outward about impacts with not realizing what we might be causing. We might be thinking and focusing on the error of other people's ways rather than doing what I call, stay on your side of the fence, so to speak. It might shut down openness to getting to collect, to receiving feedback and seeing that feedback through a caring and graceful lens, honoring the impact you might have on somebody if it's an unintended impact, and respecting that somebody's intentions were good, even if that was the case. So there's a lot that tends to happen when you see this gap between, yeah, I think I'm pretty self-aware, and yet we know most of us are not. And when we start to understand this gap, perhaps we're in the 10% who actually are, but you know what? Let's assume we're not. And if we're not, that gives us license and permission and encouragement to work on that and to become more self-aware. And know that this is a journey. This is not a destination. We're not going to hit the self-awareness goal and say, all right, we're self-aware, we're done. But in fact, it's a constant exploration and reflection that will change as we grow, as well as we move up in organizations. So that's why I wanted to put this here in terms of self-awareness and leadership. The reason this is so important that we do what leaders do, the way leaders behave tell us this is the behavior that you need to exhibit to be a leader. What leaders say important are the things we tend to work on. And so self-awareness in leadership is particularly important. Understanding how your actions influence the attitudes of the people that you lead or the teams that you manage is directly connected to the productivity of those teams. And by being more self-aware, you can be more effective as a leader because you're making those adaptations and changes, whether it's collectively for the group or how you connect with an individual employee, as well as an overall positive work environment. So if you are aware actively and ongoing how others are perceiving your words and actions, that's what allows you to evolve your style. And so for all of these different characteristics, these are things to be thoughtful of. It's not that you need to see this as a checklist and you move down this checklist, but more that there are lots of different attributes and skills and competencies that are tied directly to self-awareness and how it helps us to be better leaders. Now, I've already touched on some of these, but when we think about self-awareness and what are the benefits of self-awareness and why it's important, I've already actually mentioned, I think, most of these: a sense of well-being, better, higher levels of confidence. I didn't talk about we are better communicators, and I just want to touch on that briefly. Communication, as we say, is a two-way street, and we're going to talk about aligning communication and intention in a little bit. But before we do that, I think it's important for us to understand that when we are making word choices and when we are communicating with others in the workplace, we are doing that based on what we are processing and thinking internally, but aren't always necessarily thinking about the impact or how it's going to land on somebody else. We have good intentions, but the road to HE double hockey sticks, I won't say that word out loud, the road to there is paved with good intentions, and we've all heard that saying. We can make better decisions on how we communicate, as well as be thoughtful about the totality of our communication. Because it's not just the words, it's our facial expressions, it's our body positioning and movements, it's gestures that we might make. I don't even know what that gesture is, but those are the different types of things that are all part of our communication. And being aware of all the totality of all of that can help us be better communicators and leaders. Now run your eye down this list. Who hasn't worked with somebody who's exhibited one or more of these behaviors over the course of their career? It's easy to see this when somebody else is doing it. But if you look down this list, I'll just run my eye down the list. Do we know when we're the ones that are doing this? So going back to the 95% of people who think they're self-aware, 10% to 15% actually are. In that article that I was talking about, they shared a survey that they did. And it was across different industries, working adults. And they found that 99% of people reported they worked with at least one person. And half of the workers said that half of the people surveyed said they worked with at least 4 people who they thought were unself-aware. And peers across, laterally were more likely to see that lack of self-awareness in others versus their direct reports, only 33%, or their bosses, 32%, or their clients, 16%. Now, the client aspect is particularly important if you work in public accounting or you work in an industry that is a professional services industry, because you don't want to appear this way among your engagement teams because it might change the way the team performs or behaves around the client. And certainly understanding how you are showing up in front of the client and seeing the cues and clues here to know how they might be showing up, because we are the other half of their communication. So there's opportunities to influence that as well. And then there's this. I want to be careful that I don't overemphasize being self-aware, because at some point you can get to the point of feeling conspicuous, and over self-evaluation can lead to anxiety. Too much introspection can push you into the space of isolation. It can be draining. And so we want to be careful that we're not becoming distressed or anxious or worried because of how people perceive us. Self-awareness is about growing and evolving and changing, but not necessarily, it's not about getting to the point where we need to hide. It's about growth. So that's important to remember, because it's true. As you become more self-aware, there was somebody who said this in my life, years ago. And what they said was mindfulness ruins your life. And I thought that was funny. But the point of that was that as you work on self-awareness, the challenge is once you know something about it, you have to do something about it. So that's where that comes from. I just put this article up here as a reference point. I would encourage you to read it. I really wanted it to lean onto, and I think the most important part of this is that last sentence, that self-awareness can interpret, people who are self-aware can interpret their actions, feelings, and thoughts objectively. This is really the foundation for being authentic. And that's because, my definition of fearless inclusion, I say it starts by looking inward, not outward. It's the ability to be yourself, the freedom to be yourself, and the ability to create space for others to do the same. That really resonated when I was looking at this article, because understanding how we show up, who we want to be, and how others are experiencing us, that gives us that freedom to be ourselves. And it signals to others, this is critically important, that what we do, particularly as leaders, sends a very clear signal about how safe it is for others to do this around us. All right, so understanding intentionality. We talk about self-awareness, we talk about authenticity, and so those two things come together, and what underlies that is this intentionality. So I do want to talk about that. And we'll open that up. We'll start that with another polling question. So when you think about good intentions, what does that mean to you? So let's see.
All right, we have that poll 2 open right now. So go ahead and get your votes in.
Meanwhile, I'm going to look at the Q&A. I see, does changing attitudes help us improve our self-awareness? Absolutely. But part of what helps us change our attitudes is working on becoming more self-aware. It takes practice to be reflective. We don't just naturally start to be reflective. If we are focusing on what we're doing without thinking about why we are doing it, it's only half the battle. Somebody said, I am self-aware, but I know for a fact I do not say what I really believe at work, as there is a double standard. Oh, that is very fair. Thank you for sharing that. I personally believe it does not matter what color, religion, or sex you are, as long as you are capable of doing your job. And I really don't care what their color is if they perform their job, as we are all required to perform. I really appreciate that sentiment. The only thing I will say to that and invite people to reflect on is that there are biases that we have as humans. It is a natural part of our brain to do that. And there are norms and standards that many of us feel pressure to comply to. So although we don't look at gender or age or race, we subconsciously factor those things in. And for some of us, it causes us to hold back because we're afraid that that's happening. All right. So is the poll done? I don't know if I should be looking at this.
Yeah, I went ahead and closed it. And if you go to the closed tab, you could see, it looks like we have 73% of the audience saying well-meaning, and then the next one would be 11% saying constructive.
Yes, versus altruistic and noble. And 7% said kind-hearted. And what's interesting is it's a little bit of all of these to have good intentions. The well-meaning is what I was leaning into when you think about good intentions. Most of us aren't trying to be hurtful or harmful, but the question is, how does intention show ultimately tie to what we're doing? And then it influences how we're showing up. I clearly hit the wrong button here on my keyboard. Sorry about that. So what are the difference between intention, and intentionality? I am splitting hairs here on purpose because I think we are using these terms interchangeably. And so let's define them very, very clearly. Intent is why I want to do something. Self-awareness is intent. What is my why? Who am I? The objective of this is the goal. And then the action plan. It's great to have a goal, but how are you going to get there? So my intention is to lose weight. My goal, I want to lose 15 pounds. Intentionality, I'm going to exercise more. I'm going to change how I eat. I'm going to sleep better. I am going to drink more water. Whatever it is, that's how I differentiate these things. The reason that this is important is that when we are setting intention, it is important for us to be conscious of our own thoughts, our own attitudes, our own behaviors, the ones that we are not showing, as well as the ones that we are showing that we might not be aware of, which is why reflecting and paying attention to them. We want to be intentional. We want to have an active mind and brain that is processing what we're doing in real time versus unconscious, subconsciously moving around and navigating the world. This is what makes it difficult, and where we sometimes bump into that difference between that wasn't my intention and the reason that you have this gap when you say that wasn't my intention because there was an unintended impact on somebody might be because we believe we are showing up a certain way. We believe we are behaving a certain way. The behavior, the background, the experiences, those personality differences, those styles, all of those come together to help the other person interpret the meaning of what we are saying. And if they interpret that meaning differently, if they take it differently, if they think you are alluding to something when in fact you're being very direct, it's going to change the exchange and the impact of that interaction. Just like if you are alluding to something and they think you're being direct, it's going to change. So understanding that how you are showing up, your intention for showing up, and then the expression of that intention is critically important in closing the gap between being authentic and how well you know yourself and how you are showing up. So intentionality versus intention. Intentionality is how am I going to get there? And how am I going to get there at the end in the workplace? It comes down to our communication. And that is all forms and styles and types of communication, whether I'm giving direction, whether I am providing motivation and encouragement, whether I'm providing feedback, good feedback, constructive feedback, difficult feedback. All of those situations require us to be very mindful about how we are showing up and show up authentically. And by authentically, that means you don't want somebody else to think you are faking it, you are pretending, you are acting, and therefore I don't trust what you're saying. If you're giving somebody feedback, the goal of that feedback is to help them to do better, perform better, overcome a challenge that they're having, develop some technical expertise in a particular area. You need them to believe that your intentions are good so that the outcome that you're helping them achieve can be trusted and received. So that's what's really important. Now, I want to add this one last layer, and that is the layer of curiosity, because what curiosity does is it changes our mind from simply judging things to starting to want to explore them, maybe anticipating things. We start to notice new ideas, and we're trying to figure out different and novel ways of doing things and processing information. General curiosity is actually seeking out this kind of information, and it's looking at depth, at breadth, like a lot of different things, not necessarily going deep in any one thing. That's not something our profession might be known for doing. What we are good at is this specific curiosity, which is I want to learn a particular thing. I want to get better at something. I want to solve this problem. This problem is complex. And so we start spending a lot of time digging around in there. We want to develop both sides of that curiosity, because being curious, asking questions, exploring, being open to new ideas really helps signal that I am open. It is safe to be open in this environment. And it does empower you to be more authentic. All right, so this last piece is then we want to bring it all together, because you have the best of intentions, but do those intentions get you where you want to be? And so if you've ever had this situation happen, now to be fair, I am doing a really cheesy illustration here. So you have somebody whose intention is to be helpful. So because they want to be helpful and they're seeing their colleague and their colleague is challenged with something, maybe they can't find the data that they're looking for, you say to them, I'm not sure you're looking at the right information. I'd be happy to do that for you. Now you have good intentions, but could it be that this person hears, what do you think, I'm stupid? And that could be because of your expressions, your body language, your tone of voice, the gestures that you're having, that they perceive you as being phony, aka inauthentic. All of those filters then come in and impact the way somebody is receiving you. So the difference between how I mean to show up and how the other person is interpreting all of those behaviors, that's what we call the intention impact gap. And one of the things that I've always said, I say this in my house, I say this with my kids. It started in our household when I looked at my sons and they're fussing and fighting with each other. And I've come to zoom out and realize this is a universal thing at work, at the grocery store, what have you. It doesn't matter what I say. It only matters what you hear. And I say that because if you've ever said that is not what I meant, that was not my intention, that is not what I thought I was saying. Oftentimes, what we're really saying is, I said it right, you heard it wrong. When in fact, if we can listen to how the other person heard it, that is part of our evolution of growing and expanding our self-awareness muscle, if you will. Understanding the impact we are having on someone else is a very good feedback loop for us to think, how could I have said it better? That might be unique to a particular person. How could I have said it better? That might be unique to a particular client or team. And then how is what I am doing influencing the way people are hearing what I'm doing and saying? So what do we mean by alignment? Well, this is where she wants to be helpful. So she says, and I don't mean to be sarcastic here, but this is what we call the simple truth. I'm happy to help. Let me know if you need anything. You observe somebody as having a challenge, you want to be helpful, say that, as opposed to coming up with what you think the helpful solution is and then offering that. You want to meet someone where they are and offer them what you're offering without being prescriptive or directive, because that can sometimes feel passive aggressive. It can feel patronizing. It can feel dismissive. One last note about intentions, and that we need to be thoughtful about what they are. Intention setting is actually on the surface very easy, but more difficult when you dig down inside, because there are a lot of things driving our intention. And so not all of them are good, and many of them are not conscious. So that's something to be mindful of as we start to focus on that. So this last section I want to talk about is, how do we pull all of this together? So I want to be authentic at work. I wanted to feel the sense of agency and that I can come to work without having to pretend to be something I'm not. And I can show up how I want to show up at work, not feeling like I need to comply to some rule. And so that's becoming more self-aware around how I'm showing up, the impact I'm having. What is it that's holding me back? Recognizing that some of that might be this intention impact gap, and thinking more intentionally about how to express myself so that what I am saying and what I'm doing is being received as intended. And so that's what I call conscious communication, which is conveying that information clearly, being respectful, but in a way that others can understand. And so what is involved in this? This is listening. This is being thoughtful, not reactive or impulsive. And this is paying attention to what's happening within our bodies to get those feedback loops, not just what other people are saying and doing and how they're reacting to us, but how those same things are impacting us, because it all is interrelated. If I'm feeling defensive, the things that are going to come out of my mouth might be sharper. They might not be as kind and considerate. They might be a bit terse. And that's going to affect the way they see me, which is going to affect the way I react, and so on. This is a loop that we want to get out of. So what is conscious communication? I have four or five items here to think about. Someone asked here, what are some tools to help those of us who believe they're relatively self-aware but struggle with self-control or reactivity? That is a great question. That could be related to neurodiversity. For example, someone with ADHD might struggle with blurting and interrupting, And that might be because they have difficulty holding an idea. So that, I'm not suggesting that that's what you're saying, but that's just one type of indicator on what can we do if we think we're self-aware and yet we seem to be reactive. One of the things that you can also do is what I'm going to talk about now. And this is called real-time awareness. Real-time awareness is the ability to notice in the moment that you're being reactive, because you can't change something if you don't know you're doing it. So that's the hard part. So here's something that you can do if you find yourself in a situation where you are being perhaps reactive. The first thing is to think, what am I thinking about right now? What's happening? And then what am I feeling? Because sometimes we're checked out and sometimes we're not noticing that I'm starting to feel a little frustrated here. How are all of these affecting you physically? Like, are you starting to stiffen up? Are you starting to clench your jaw? That kind of thing. And then how's it affecting my behavior? Are you starting to roll your eyes or look away? All of those are things that if you start to just do this scan, that is a simple technique to start to develop self-awareness, because the trick is self-awareness is noticing it in the moment and evolving and adapting and changing, rather than being reactive and after the fact realizing, oh, wow, I was ... So that's just a simple technique that you can use. Another technique, mindfulness. And mindfulness is really around maintaining this state. It talks about here is about noticing what's happening in the moment. And in fact, this next slide is really the 3 steps. So what am I thinking and feeling right now without judgment, so that all of those non-conscious thoughts become conscious, and then we can interrupt those and move into that space of intention. If we want to be intentional with what we're saying, then we want to pay attention to this moment and bring into my awareness all of the things that might be influencing what I'm about to say, so that I can be thoughtful about what I say and it aligns with my intention. It feels like a lot of steps, but with practice, we can do this. The next thing is about being prepared. And preparedness is really important, not just because you're coming into or walking into a difficult situation, but it can also be because you find yourself in an uncomfortable moment. You just said something, you had an unintended impact on somebody, you thought you were being transparent, and you didn't expect it to end up this way. So imagining what a situation might look like in advance is important if you're walking into an uncomfortable situation. But what's also helpful is to have an emotional template, if you will, which is, when I feel this way, I want to behave that way. And creating these processes for yourself so that you can stay grounded and connected during an uncomfortable moment. Now, what are the kinds of things that happen when you are finding yourself in these moments that are kind of awkward or difficult? Things that can go wrong are all of those other reasons that hold us back. So mismatched communication styles, people aren't listening openly or clearly, the filters that I have these past experiences with somebody, so I've put all of these filters and that is how I see them. That is also tied to bias. There are a lot of things that come into play. Actually, I want to ask this poll, thinking about, we'll open this next one, thinking about a recent misunderstanding that you might have had. Could it have been because of one of these things? So you have somebody who's doing that. They're applying those filters to you, or they're making those assumptions about you, or they are taking something entirely out of context. And maybe that's because of a reputation that perhaps you have developed unfairly so. That also might be bias from past events. So let me come to the poll and see how that's going. Is that open? Oh yeah, I see it.
Yep, I just it's open and we should have responses coming. I feel like there should be an all of the above on this one.
You know what? You're all right. But I was thinking about something, maybe the biggest thing that popped up into your head.
Right.
While that poll is open, I'll come back to it in a moment, but I want to talk about the next one, candor. And I want to bring this up here because part of all of those things that are happening in those uncomfortable conversations might be because we know what we want to say I just don't feel like I can. That's a very different thing than I know what I want to say, but I don't necessarily feel like I should, or I don't know how to say it. If we don't create a space where we are allowed to stumble our way through these uncomfortable moments, we're going to find ourselves in these situations where we are making assumptions, or we are not having the opportunity to clarify the context, or step back and pause because we're bumping into each other. And if you've ever had that situation where you're like, no, let's start this over and let's take this from the top. We need permission and agreement that when we say that, we're actually going to do that. So it looks like that poll is still open, or have you closed it? I want to make sure I'm looking in the right place.
I just closed it on your prompt. So I went ahead and closed that. I think it's been open more than a minute, so we're good.
So F is all of the above, but we don't have that one. So 40% said making assumptions, which is so true, but it's also making assumptions is bias from past events, perhaps, or it is ignoring the context because I am taking a reputation, a past experience with somebody over what's actually happening in the moment. So, and it could come down to this last piece about candor. And then the last one is on empathy. And I put empathy here on purpose because too often we're listening to tell the other person that they're wrong. But what we really want to invite you to do, what I want to invite you to do, especially in terms of developing self-awareness in those uncomfortable moments in particular, those are the moments where we learn. We don't learn when we do it right. We learn when we trip up, but getting up and dusting ourselves off, so to speak. One of the main things we can do here is listening to understand where the other person is coming from. That's how we start to appreciate how other people are experiencing us. Now, a big part of this is recognizing that, acknowledging what somebody else is saying. I heard you. I think what you're saying is, if I can repeat this back, what I thought I heard was ... Acknowledging does not mean I am agreeing with you. It means I heard you. And we all want to be heard. There are a couple types of acknowledgement. I have a couple of examples here. One is that I think I might have just said something, or I think something just happened. It's bringing into our awareness the unspoken and acknowledging it. Another one might be, wow, I can't believe I just ... Or in this case, I think what I said sounded a little harsh. And for that, I'd like to apologize. And now I can reset and come back forward. We need permission to do that. Remember, the candor needs to be there that says, I can say this and you will take me at this, at my word, and we both will come back to this conversation in the present, ready, open to move forward and engage. And then the last one is gratitude. Wow, thank you for sharing that with me. That was very helpful. It doesn't take much. That acknowledgement doesn't mean what they shared with you, you agree with or you think it is right. What you are acknowledging is, and expressing appreciation for, is that they shared it with you. And this is something that you can now put into your library of information as you develop and continually hone and grow that self-awareness muscle. So the last thing I'll say is that the piece that I've been talking about, the real-time awareness, is really where I've been focusing these pieces, is part of this framework that I've developed called the REM 360 framework. And this framework is a holistic framework. You can use it across your organization. You can use it between you and another person in interpersonal relationships with colleagues. And you can also use it to develop that internal self-awareness. And it has those 3 steps. The first one is, and what is this framework? This framework is so that you can be prepared and move forward with intention and not be reactive or defensive. And this is critically important because that is how we develop that self-awareness muscle, empower us with bravery and confidence to now move forward with openness, transparency, vulnerability. All of those things are the things that are required for us to be our whole selves at work or to be more authentic. So real quick, the first one, real-time awareness, is creating that mind-body connection with that scan. The second one, I didn't mean for those to play in like that. The second one is what I call emotional anchoring, which is knowing, coming back to how do I want to be, how do I want to behave, and staying present in that behavior, staying rooted in that, despite the fact that things are You're having an uncomfortable or difficult situation. So getting grounded, by the way, is I define that as coming back to the present. You forget what just happened and you set aside what's about to happen and you just focus on the now. Centered is reconnecting, that internal self-awareness. It's reconnecting to who I want to be, what my purpose is in this conversation, what my purpose is in this role, what my purpose is on this team, to restore that balance. And having that in your present mind can help you navigate through these uncomfortable moments and build that confidence to be yourself. And then the last one, mindful recovery, is around how do you give yourself grace when you've done an oopsie, when you had that unintended impact. Finding ways to recover from those moments so that the feedback that you're getting to help you grow isn't the thing that makes you become that overly self-conscious, highly conspicuous person. That is what we're talking about, that loop, that 360 framework. All right, so these are my closing thoughts. Really, it's just what it says here. You want to be thinking about that body scan, the real-time awareness scan, so that you can become more aware in real time of what you're reacting to and other people, how they might be reacting to you. Noticing those things that are creating those shifts, the things that might be triggering you, so to speak. That internal communication that is influencing all the external communication, whether it's body language, expression. We need to make sure we're thinking about it more than the words and the tone of voice that are coming out of our mouths. Being mindful of context, being empathetic as we listen to understand how other people are feeling, and acknowledge the impact that we are having on others, even though that impact is a little bit different than the one we were expecting to have. And so with that, I'm going to go to the Q&A. And while we do that, maybe we can open that final poll.
All right, I went ahead and did that. So we have our fourth and final poll up on your screens now. Go ahead and get your answers in. And I did move a few questions over for you.
So what if someone is unwilling to listen to the other person's point of view, or if someone tries to make you believe you're a bad person for no reason? What is a technique for resolution? Well, if somebody wants to make you believe you're a bad person, I'm going to go with the stay on your side of the fence. And, that is what somebody, I acknowledge that is how you feel, but I don't agree. It's okay to disagree. But what I don't want to say is point my finger at you and say, well, you're wrong and here's why, because that's not going to move us forward. And if somebody is unwilling to listen to another person's point of view, again, I can't make them listen. But what I might want to do is start to notice, is there something I said? Is there something I did? And try to get a better understanding of what might be behind this interpersonal interaction. And that might mean you have to seek guidance and feedback elsewhere before you can bring it back to this person that you're struggling with. I think that was the only real question that was in here. There were some other ones that were comments. I think I addressed the other ones already. I would encourage you to download a copy of the handouts because I did go through some of these. There are a lot of words on a lot of these slides. And you're welcome to reach out to me. Thank you all for joining me. With that, I think we'll wrap it up and I'll send it back to you, Vaughn, to close us out.
All right, wonderful.